Okay, we're going to be taking the starter out and replacing it. Just found out my starter's bad. So after 250 something thousand miles, it finally died. Seems like it's the standard time that they die. So anyway, I'm going to try to do this while the sun's still out. I took all of these bolts out for the upper part of the intake manifold, but the gasket's pretty tight, so I didn't want to snap this. So I started taking off the bolts that hold the entire manifold on. You can actually, with a long extension and a swivel head, a 12mm swivel head, you can get down, I don't know if you can get the camera angle down there, but you can get down into each one of these openings. I guess they perfectly sized it and positioned it so you can get to all the bolts. Then in the back, this wiring harness is bolted back there with one bolt. Once you remove that and push it out of the way, it'll give you access to that last bolt. And that's pretty much it. You undo these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts, and then another 5 on that side. This should be loose now, and all you have to do is disconnect all the injectors. So you have all these injectors you got to disconnect. I disconnected the temp sensors, these two, the coolant temperature sensors, the throttle body I took off with these 4 bolts, and I left the cable on because it was a little difficult getting it off, but it should just slide right out, but it was a little tough, so I left that on. But all you need to do is put this to the side, out of the way. Coolant is going to come out of these ports. This is coolant lines that go into here. So when you take this off and this off, you'll have coolant drip out. Don't be alarmed by that. You got to take these connectors off. Having this kind of plier or similar with an angled tip is going to save you a lot of time and hassle, because you can just grab on to the connector like that, and there's little tabs here, so when you clamp onto it, you can just pop it right out. So I highly recommend getting a pair of pliers like this, well worth the money. Okay, try to, oh, there you go. So I undid those screws and now it's just loose. I didn't even need to really pop it off. So let me go ahead and lift it up now. Really, I'm gonna keep going here, but I don't think you need to take this top part off that like everybody else has been doing. I think all you need to do is just take this entire manifold off. Alright. So this gas line here is the only thing I need to disconnect now. It's left, and that goes over here to this fuel filter. So I might not even need to take this off. I could just probably leave the intake manifold here, but I do want to clean out the intake itself. If you look, you can see the valves there, the intake valves. I got a pretty good amount of dirt and deposits on some of them, so it'll be good to clean this out properly. So we'll do that, but this is where the starter is. Okay, I set up a quick test. So I know this video is going to be a little difficult for me to edit because I'm kind of in a rush to get this done, just like everybody is when they have this kind of situation happen. So anyway, the battery, I've been leaving the battery for unattended for a while, and it kept dying on me. I'm not sure if that contributed to the starter failing, trying to crank it with a low battery constantly. But anyway, the starter did die eventually. I charged the battery fully and I went to start it, and I kept just hearing the click noise, but which sounded like the solenoid engaging, but nothing actually rotating. So I got a new starter. This is a remanufactured Denso one, and I thought this was going to be the original starter, but turns out if you look at the information on the starter, sorry, this is all live right now, which is dangerous, but I want to keep it just to show you. So there is a sticker on here. Yeah, right there. That says Toyota Denso remanufactured for Toyota. So I don't know if that's a remanufactured one or the original. Yeah, because this sticker says Denso, that's it, and this one says Toyota remanufactured for Toyota. So this might be, it says Japan on it, so this might be the original starter actually. Might possibly be the original. So I'm not sure about that. If anybody knows in the comments, just please leave a comment. But it might be the original starter. I mean, judging by the condition of it, it probably is. The insides of this is, you know, there's a lot of corrosion going on here, but the solenoid still works. The starter motor itself is what failed. And the way you can test these, so this is your power to run the motor and the solenoid, and this is your signal to basically engage this. So basically just like a relay. So you're triggering the coil in here to push this out, and when this pushes out, it engages. There's like a little mushroom head shaped plunger in there that makes contact between these two posts, this post and this post, and that sends power over to the motor to spin it. So it's pretty straightforward. You're sending signal to this, 12 volt signal to this, which activates the coil in here. The coil pushes the plunger out, and the plunger makes contact with these two posts, basically connecting your 12 volt main to your motor, and that turns your motor on. So what might be bad with this is this plunger, the contact's not contacting properly, resulting in the motor not spinning. So I did go ahead and test this, and basically you see the plunger shoot out, but you don't hear the motor come on. So there is a kit to replace the contacts in here. That is an option. It's like a $15 kit, but you know, this is kind of, you know, people say this is a real pain in the ass and it's a terrible design, but I mean, if this is the original starter, from what I've heard, people have been replacing this every like 200,000, 250,000 miles. You know, having to do a job like this at 250,000 miles, cars don't even, a lot of cars these days don't even last that long to begin with, let alone just having to replace a starter on it. But anyway, it's not that big of a job. There's a few videos that show the intake manifold. Here, let me walk over and show you this intake manifold. They show this intake manifold cover. The top portion of it is a two-piece setup, and they show the top piece taking all the screws out and taking the top piece of this cover off. So you don't need to do that, and not doing that saves you a considerable amount of time on this. I mean, most of the job is taking these screws out, and that's it. Once you take those out, it's just a lot of hoses, a lot of connections you got to disconnect. But it's not, you know, you don't need a tremendous amount of tools to do it. The main difficulty of getting the starter out is the bolts, accessing the bolts from the back. Now there's see this piece there that goes up and over? That's got coolant running through it, and it's the coolant loop basically. So people have said you have to take that off in order to access the bolts there, but you don't. It's not the easiest access, but if all you really need is a breaker bar or any ratchet will do. You don't really have a lot of room to ratchet back and forth, so having one of those, I have the Milwaukee automatic ratchet, so I was using that It's a 17 millimeter nut that looks like this. So you got quite a bit of meat there. It's not like a shallow nut that you're trying to get access to. If you can get your socket, you know, even that much onto here, you're going to be able to get this off. And it's not as bad as people claim it is. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but once you do it, you're like, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought. You will have to pretty much climb onto this engine bay though. I was pretty much standing up here and reaching down in there. Well, not standing, just, you know, crouching here. I put on some knee pads, rested my knees here. You definitely are going to want to have some knee pads to do this. And just be careful, because those two are, that's the knock sensor right there, that gray sensor. And there's another one on that side. You want to be careful. You don't want to damage those, because that's going to be a pain in the place and added cost, and just not, you know, just be real careful when you're doing that. The other thing is, you don't need to disconnect this from the starter until you disconnect those bolts, and you can pull it out and turn it a little and get easy access to this nut, because that's really hard to do when it's in there and tight. So I've seen a few videos saying that you got to disconnect that first, and that I would just pull the starter out, tweak it a little bit, then you can get to that nut a lot easier. So basically, let me just show you a quick test of the starter. Let me zoom out a little. So I got the power connected to here, to power, 12 volts. Ground is the case, so I grounded the case there. I just have these cables hooked up to the charger, just because the battery's running kind of low. And then this is your signal, so I connected the black wire to the positive also. So this is your signal here, so all you have to do is take your signal and just tap, just touch it against the tab, and you can watch when I do that. When I do that, you can watch the plunger come out. See that? How the plunger comes out? I mean, this is, everybody knows this, but just to show you what it looks like and what it should sound like. Hopefully this motor is in good shape. I know when they remanufacture it, they pretty much just clean it up, replace these contacts. I don't know if they take this part, you know, the internals out and redo the windings or anything in here. I hope they do. It doesn't sound great though, the motor, but it's hard to tell, because I don't know what this motor really sounds like, because it only runs for a couple of seconds. You know, it's not like you can compare it to the old motor. But anyway, this is what it sounds like, and this is what it looks like. So that's that. The old one, like I said, is just all you hear is the plunger come out. The motor never starts, so it could be the contacts. Most likely it is the contacts, because these motors are pretty, you know, there's really not much that can go wrong with them. So yeah, that's that. I'm gonna be replacing it with a new one. I would recommend you guys do the same, unless you're really comfortable with taking the whole thing apart and putting it back together. If you know, which isn't a terrible job. So if you're good with that, then just replace the contacts in this. You should probably be good for, you know, another 100 and something thousand miles, if you do the servicing yourself. But I decided to go with the new, because I would rather just have the peace of mind knowing that it's everything's brand new, and I don't have to worry about any little other thing breaking on it. Okay, so let's get this bad boy back in and get back on the road. Okay, so the starter goes in just like this into the opening. You can see there. It's the opening. You got one bolt there and one bolt on the left and one bolt on the right. So you got two bolts holding it in, and that's it. And then this wiring harness has a screw hole right there that gets bolted to the top part of the starter right there. So the two bolts go right through here and here, and right there is where that top part of the plastic bracket screws into. Alright, so let's put it in. Okay, basically just positioned the starter, stuck it in. First I put that nut on side, that little cap, you gotta make sure you close it, and then I put the bolt in right there. So that bolt goes into that, holding that plastic bracket on. Just have to tighten that up and then put the other 2 screws that hold the alternator in. Okay, just so you have an idea of what it's like, what the access is like, I have the ratchet right there. It's going down. Let's see. Got a decent amount of space back there. And it comes down, connects to the bolt, which is right there. I'll show you, I'll take it. So it just slips on like that. It's actually a 14 millimeter. So slip it on, tighten it down. That's pretty much it. The other one is a little harder to get to, but it's still accessible. Sorry about the camera, but that's one bolt, and the other one's right there. So not terribly difficult to get to. You got a decent amount of space to get your ratchet down in there. So if you see it just goes down, and if you have a long enough extension on it, you can just get it in there with a flex, and just, I don't even need a flex actually. Get it down in there and get it right on the nut. Make sure you push that plug back in and you close this cap. Then you're all set. You're done with the starter. So now we're gonna put the intake manifold. Well, we're gonna put the new gaskets on. Had to order some new gaskets. We're gonna put those on, and then put the intake manifold back on. All right. Obviously, at this point, you should know that you got to make sure these surfaces are clean, free of any debris. You know, now might be a good time to clean out the injectors or do some fuel injection cleaning, since you have it all apart. I think I can actually put these screws back in now. That's holding this wiring harness. I think I can push that. I think I can screw that back in before I put the intake manifold on. Would make it easier to do. Probably didn't even need to take that off. I did actually. I did need to take it off because I had to push. Yeah, good thing I didn't put that screw back in. So you don't want to put this screw back in because you got to push this out of the way in order to get the bolt on to here. So in order to get this bolt on, this part of the harness is in the way. So you unbolt that, push this out of the way, get that bolt in, and then you can bring this back and screw it down. Okay, don't forget to put these knock sensor connectors back in. Okay, this is the manifold kit that I got. Got it off Amazon. I think it was like 36 bucks or something. These gaskets we're not going to use, so I'm not taking the I'm not splitting the intake manifold in two. It's just going to be these two headers, header gaskets for the intake. So just remember how the old one went. I think there's only one way this can go back on, so oh no, there's two ways. So you want to make sure these two tabs are facing the same way that you removed it, and I'll show you how that goes. So this is the old gasket. These are the new gaskets. That's the way those tabs are supposed to go. Alright, so let's put the manifolds on now. Okay, make sure you reconnect the ground. That's just connected to the side of this intake manifold. It's just a wire hanging out. You gotta just reconnect it to the ground. Once you have this set in place, you can go ahead and start reconnecting all these hoses that you disconnected. Hopefully remember where they all go. You can put these connections back on. You got the temp sensors. Just take your time, do it right, make sure you hear all the clicks. I left the screws back in here so I don't misplace them. So I'm going to put this back on and then just start connecting all the lines back. Okay, got that connector back on. Pretty straightforward, just pushes on and push that blue thing back in until you hear it click. Make sure you reconnect all your injectors. Clip all these back on. This one. So this, you can see this went here. So you gotta undo the screw here. I'm just showing you all the screws, so when you do it, you know exactly what screws have to go where. So that'll go here, and the screw will go back in. Obviously, you know, there's a fine line between going too in depth and being annoying and giving you some information that, you know, would be helpful when you, before you start tackling this project. If you see one of the injectors are like angled like that, if it's facing that way or like that, tweaked, you can just move these around. They're not you know, the O-ring is really all they're sitting on, so you can move them around. I mean, replacing the O-rings is not a bad idea for the injectors. But anyway, I'm just trying to get this back together. I didn't have any problems or issues with it, so I'm not trying to make more work for myself, although it's probably a good idea to do it now. Alright, so let's just keep moving on here. I'm going to put all these bolts back in for the top part. I don't know, I didn't need to take these off, so I'm going to put them all back in now. Okay, got this back on. The bracket gets screwed in. This hose gets reconnected. The throttle cable gets remounted to there. And right over here I have the throttle body here. Some people might not know this, but this is a fly-by-wire system, so this is just a sensor here, potentiometer or a positioner or whatever over here. That's, you're pulling the cable, turning this thing, and then the motor here is actually opening and closing the throttle. So this really could be, you know, anywhere. You don't even need a cable. You could have just had a wired sensor, like, you know, the more modern cars have. But, you know, it's kind of crazy. In '98, you got this cable operated sensor that's, you know, basically fly-by-wire here. Because look, I'm not controlling the actual butterfly valve here. Cool. Alright, so anyway, there's nuts on the ends here. There's a nut there, and then there's bolts, 1, 2, 3, 3 bolts, and then at the end there's another nut, and then a nut on that side, 1, 2, 3 bolts, and then another nut on this side, right there. So that's the only thing that's holding the intake manifold on. So got that back on and bolted down. I torqued all these screws down, torqued all those screws. Now we're just going to put this back on. The bolts that hold the wiring harness brackets in place are smaller. You know, they're 10mm and a smaller shaft, so they tend to break pretty easily, especially from being heat treated the whole time from the direct connection to the block. It's being heat treated constantly, so they're fragile and they're not very I guess they're brittle. So just be careful taking those out and putting them back. I would have a couple of these 10mm bolts on hand. All of the bolts and everything that I've gotten for this car, I keep all the spares or anything I take off and replace just in case, because they're all the same, relatively the same sizes. So if I break or lose one, I always have, you know, a spare. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead, put this back on, reconnect the coolant lines here and here, and then I'll show you where we're at. Okay, one thing I noticed, so the intake here, right past this butterfly, was covered in oil, and each of the ports are all covered in oil. So right here is where the crankcase ventilation PCV valve, positive crankcase ventilation valve, is. So clearly that's not working right now. I mean, I did replace this, but it seems like it's so I'm gonna have to put in a new one because it's actually letting oil in and clogging up the whole intake manifold. So I cleaned it all out now, but if I don't replace that PCV, it's just gonna get caked with oil again. So I'm gonna replace that PCV valve again. All right, I got this connection back on, that connection back on, and now we're just gonna go ahead and put the two nuts there and the two bolts on the bottom, tighten it down, and then we can put the whole intake assembly back on. All right, so I got the throttle body and everything back on, but I forgot to put this little hose back on. So you're gonna wanna make sure you put that on before you do, tighten everything up. It's still possible, but it's just a pain in the put that back on, and then we should be good to go. Okay, doing a final check here. Everything looks to be in order. Tight, sealed. Okay, we obviously lost some coolant there, so we're gonna have to make sure you have some extra coolant left, because you're gonna definitely have to top that off. Okay, let's go ahead and cycle the key a little bit to build some fuel pressure, because you remember the rails are empty now. You're gonna have air in the rails, so it's gonna take a few cranks, so don't be alarmed. As long as it does crank, that's all that matters. Okay, after all that work, we're gonna go ahead, put the key in, cycle it a couple of times. Okay, we're gonna give it a crank. Nice. There we go. Finally got let's double check, make sure everything's running properly. Looks good. Calm down. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead, shut it off, and start it back up. See how quickly it starts now. Okay, it's off. Take a couple more cranks. Shut it off. Crank it one more time.